Hey, just before we begin, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe if you haven't, leave a comment with a request on what I should cover next, and follow me on Twitch for horror gaming streams and on Instagram for other general stuff. Enjoy the video.
Since the turn of the millennium, there's been many contemporary efforts made to revitalize and reinterpret the fatiguing zombie genre, with perhaps the most socially conscious subversion to kickstart this trend being Danny Boyle and Alex Garland's 28 Days Later. Now, if you've been subscribed to my channel long enough, you'll know I've had plenty to say about this film, but it can never be understated how paramount it was to injecting nuanced themes that are still harrowingly relevant today, such as social rage, public malaise, mass hysteria, global disillusionment, and the fickle fragility of the human condition. To me, it was essentially a second modern revision of Richard Matheson's forever timely 1954 novel I Am Legend, after George A. Romero first revised it in his Revered Dead trilogy. However, the difference now was that by the early to mid-2000s, these themes began to synergize with the rise of intense technological ubiquity. Alien invasions, ghostly hauntings, and viruses turning people into zombies were reframed as social metaphors for our obsessive consumption of technology and the airways of information, particularly when it came to warping and influencing the minds of those who had become hypnotized by the insidious power of bright euphoric lights and sounds, an abstract drug that gives way to primordial impulses and addiction, as is the case with the film we're about to talk about. In 2007, America very unofficially made their own attempt at 28 Days Later, but naturally went completely under the radar given it was a $50,000 independent production that received an extremely modest domestic release before jumping to home video over a year later. Fittingly entitled The Signal, this surrealist psychological horror tells the story of a mysterious broadcast that causes those exposed to it to go insane and revert to violent and sadistic behaviors. It's basically 28 Days Later, Stephen King's Cell, and bear with me here, Shaun of the Dead wrapped into one. Despite what my introduction implies, The Signal isn't so strictly an overarching social commentary, but rather it's an abusive, toxic love story where, similar to the underlying satire of Shaun of the Dead, it takes the end of the world for many of us to finally accept the tragic truth of our reality. Out the gate, The Signal is a very unconventional film that, like with many of the obscure films I've covered, definitely won't be for everyone, especially if you're hoping for answers by the end of it. In fact, it's a very loose anthology that, similar to the recent Weapons, takes a non-chronological approach to telling a single story from three unique, albeit increasingly unreliable perspectives, which the film aptly calls transmissions, but with the twist being that each story is told by a different writer-director who offers their own stylistic flair. Now, the reason I'm covering this film is because I brought it up recently when talking about Southbound, where one of the sequence directors from that film, David Bruckner, was also heavily involved in this one, where along with Dan Bush and Jacob Gentry, The Signal sees a distinct team come together to tell one creatively cohesive story. Ultimately, it's about someone trying to escape an abusive relationship while the world crumbles around them, but it's the unreliability that defines the story's ambiguity. So without further ado, brace yourself for some bloody, low-key carnage as we consume ourselves in the mind-controlling influence of aggressive, nihilistic broadcasting.
Now, before we dive into despair, this video is sponsored by Vezi. September is the perfect month to reset and start fresh, but also a time to prepare yourself for the next season of adventure. Where I'm from, every Irish summer is almost immediately followed by winter, with persistent rain, frosty temperatures, and just an overall gloomy outlook that, at one time, made me just want to hibernate indoors until next summer. However, with Vezi's Stormburst, and by extension Vezi's stylish range of shoes, coats, socks, and other accessories, I no longer fear the dreaded outdoors and instead embrace it in all its glory, thanks to Vezi's utterly magical 100% waterproof material and fitting lightweight design. I strongly recommend Stormburst for their fantastic grip and durability when dealing with wet, slippery and muddy conditions, because not only do they keep me safe and secure, but they also retain consistent comfort and breathability during extended use. In typical shoes, my feet would start to sweat and itch pretty quickly when taking Cheddar on his demanding hikes, but with Vezi's Stormburst, I find myself enjoying longer outdoor sessions that help me to relax and clear my mind after a challenging workday. All Vezi shoes come with a 1-year warranty and a worry-free 30-day return, so if you're on the fence, now is the perfect time to become part of the Vezi family. Take on your boldest adventures with the waterproof, ultra-grippy and made-to-last Stormburst footwear by scanning the QR code on screen or going to vezi.com/ryanhollinger and enjoy 15% off your first order.
The signal opens with the perfect palate cleanser to set the right tone and expectations for its strange, erratic, and emotionally volatile visual style. We see a crazed man murdering a bunch of captive women in a cabin in the woods in the eccentric style of a classical B-movie exploitation flick, before its meta foreshadowing is intercepted by a hypnotic and nauseating signal that awakens our protagonists Ben and Mia, who are revealed to be having an affair. Interestingly, the atmosphere suddenly becomes quaint and melancholic, which throughout will sharply contrast with the signal and the barbaric nature of the violence it evokes. Despite its inherently erratic nature, there's a prevailing sadness akin to Pulse that underpins both Mia and Ben's journey, as Ben begins to question why Mia doesn't simply leave her husband Lewis due to the fear and discontent her marriage is bringing her. The strife and abuse we come to understand about Mia and her yet-to-be-seen husband is conveyed subtly through visuals, music, and Mia's performance and body language. She's constantly tense, distant, and seemingly shackled to her misery, as Ben offers her an escape and chance at a fresh start by meeting him at the terminus of a train station at a specific time where they can escape the city on New Year's and find peace in the countryside. Distinctly, the phrase terminus, meaning the end or extreme point of a route, thematically conveys precisely what the filmmakers are going for with the story. In an interview with Filmmaker magazine, Dan Bush explained that the story was inspired by the prospect of imagining a better life, a more fulfilled life, a perfect love, a life without lies. In fact, that latter phrase is perfectly cemented in the revelations we learn about the signal, which causes those affected to hallucinate and delude themselves into perceiving people and events wrongfully, causing confusion and hysteria, subsequently ending in anger and violence. But we'll come back to this later. As Bush further laments, we fill in the empty spots of our unfulfilled lives with addictions or affairs, or perhaps numb the pain with self-help religions or TV. What would it take for us to act on our instincts, leave out artificial lives, and, as Ben, our protagonist, says in the opening, start a real life? The opening sees us transition from fiction into reality, but what we see later is a world unable to separate the two. Hell, what we see is basically the same event. The signal is about the lies we tell ourselves to make existing either feel purposeful or merely bearable. It presents this somber but honest disillusionment about accepting that true happiness is simply unattainable in real life. Both David Bruckner and Jacob Gentry share the same sentiment, with Gentry stating that the intent was to make a Lynchian pre-apocalyptic think piece about the breakdown of communication and a shifting societal need for connection. This takes us to Transmission 1, Crazy in Love, which focuses on Mia leaving Ben's apartment to return home as the world around her descends into violence. It's incredibly anxiety-inducing just watching Mia make her way home as distant disturbances, arguments, and deep unrest echo in the background. In fact, the subtle detail of a random woman shadowing Mia down a narrow corridor like a stalker broodingly perpetuates the life of fear and danger she constantly lives in. Again, the world we see is unreliable. It's purely subjective to the disposition of the characters centering each chapter. It uses the signal as a metaphor for the chaos in each of their lives, with Mia soon being interrogated by her domineering husband Lewis, while his intrusive friends fidget with the TV signal. By the way, I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks that AJ Bowen looks like the lost younger brother of early mid-2000s Ryan Reynolds. They are alarmingly similar to the point it's uncanny, but once you put that point aside, this entire scene perfectly evokes how suffocated and trapped Mia feels in her relationship. It never outwardly shows Lewis to be violent towards her, at least until the signal gets him, but the energy between them tells us everything we need to know. She is a hostage in this marriage and has become submissive and resigned to her fate until the inevitable fallout of the signal gives her a chance to be unbound and take control of her life. When Lewis suddenly becomes consumed by the signal and jarringly kills his friend, Mia stumbles into the hallway and is overwhelmed by the outburst of violence. It's impulsive and spontaneous. It's less a fuse that's been lit and more an explosion at the press of a button, a light switch that deactivates all cognitive reason and morality and invites, hell, justifies those possessed to take out their frustrations on all those around them. The intrusive thoughts win, so to speak, but after Lewis's other friend Rod restrains him, Mia is able to disassociate from the world by putting on her headphones to drown out the horrors and immerse herself in music that means something emotionally to her. It's an acute symbol of her escapism from reality, and she ventures forth emboldened to seek out Ben and escape the madness once and for all. However, ironically, she's then immediately abducted and rebound by Rod and remains trapped in her misery. I mean, easy come, easy go. Strangely, duct tape becomes a bit of a symbolic prop at this point about trying to haphazardly fix problems and piece the world back together. During this, let's call it temporary setback, Rod explains to Mia what I've already told you, and has consciously decided that he must exterminate those who have fully succumbed to the madness and restrain anyone who's sane and put them in a safe place for later. Or, in other words, he is batshit insane as well. In fact, he even reveals he was hit on the back of the head with a hammer, and after killing his attacker, broke down at the realization he was just as scared and confused as Rod and only acted in self-defense. What becomes clear about the signal is that it impacts everybody differently. It's never explained where it came from, and we're constantly made to doubt everything we see and hear. But if there is one thing that is certain, it's that Rod's erratic behavior isn't easing the situation for anyone. Hell, when they finally get to Mia's car in a bid to escape, Rod is shot while Mia contemplates leaving him behind and falls back into her passivity, until Rod assaults Mia for trying to leave him behind, as though triggering memories of Lewis's own abuse that prompts her into crashing her car and truly going it alone, finally having rid herself of everything associated to Lewis. This naturally transitions us into Transmission to the Jealousy Monster, which focuses on Lewis in what can be best described as a really absurdist dark comedy. This sequence serves two purposes. One is to get first-hand insight into how the signal directly affects those susceptible to it, and the other is to simply understand Lewis's psychology within it. The transmission begins by nodding to that illusion of happiness by seeing an idyllic loving couple called Anna and Ken preparing for a house party, only for it to develop into senseless violence when Anna kills Ken after he gets disrupted by the signal. Her landlord Clark then arrives after rescuing Rod from the car crash, only for him to end up accidentally killing Rod after he's hysterically attacked by him. Now, while his character has no real relevance to the main plot, Clark basically exists as a sort of conspiracy theorist whose eccentric understanding of the signal ends up being pretty on point.
It disrupts synaptic neural networks, causing extreme behavioral shifts.
However, this situational comedy only begins to worsen when Lewis arrives out of the blue after following Mia's car, and soon begins hallucinating Anna as Mia, believing he's here to save her, while flip-flopping between reality and fantasy.
She was heading straight for you with that knife.
She doesn't have a knife!
That's a keychain.
Everything about this transmission is very Coen Brothers meets Shaun of the Dead. New people just keep arriving to the party, only to get executed due to misunderstandings caused by the signal's delusions.
We have to exterminate with extreme prejudice. It might be somebody who can help us. We don't know.
The film essentially hits its most erratic crescendo as it constantly juxtaposes the oddball humor with vicious outbursts of violence, eventually returning to melancholia when Lewis effectively forces control of the situation in an abusive means fitting to his character. There is something to be said about the signal affecting him the worst because he already had violent tendencies to begin with. In fact, by the end, it very subtly implies that Lewis kind of likes it and feels strangely connected to the signal. However, really, it serves to expose their lives for what they are. He's a jealous monster seeking to control all those around him, while we've seen Mia trapped and aspiring to be free of her oppressive life. Even minor characters are shown to have aspirations too. Anna wants a fairy tale family, the lonely Clark aspires for companionship, and Ben is able to outright refuse the signal because he's destined to obtain what he wants. The transmission culminates in Lewis torturing Anna with pesticide after believing she's an imposter who knows where Mia is, while Clark is impaled to a chair with knives and is forced to watch the signal after Lewis believes he is Ben. The real Ben then arrives and incapacitates Lewis, and miraculously is able to fight the urge not to kill him. Our final act, Transmission 3, Escape from Terminus, somewhat retraces how the badly beaten Ben got to where he is. During the previous two transmissions, we see Ben trying to find Mia only to just miss her, and instead stumble upon a subdued Lewis, who he then helps before he gets into a violent altercation with him. We see Ben and Clark come to understand how to resist the signal by separating what is real from what is a lie. This is made absurdly clear when Ben seeks Clark's help in finding Mia, and Clark believes that he can jumpstart Rod's decapitated head to question him about Mia's whereabouts. But obviously it's then revealed to be a complete delusion caused by the signal eating away at Clark's psyche. It says a lot about how well the film tricks your own perception of reality by this point, because it does toe a very thin supernatural line that I was genuinely willing to believe that this was real, only to realize how warped and confused I was becoming as a result of the psychological rabbit hole every single character goes down. Clark concludes that the signal is simply replacing people's thoughts with lies and delusions, which infers to the broad metaphor Dan Bush explained by numbing the pain of existence with TV distractions and pure escapism. Whether it's an alien invasion or a government mind control experiment by the deep state or whatever you want to call it is completely up to debate. Ultimately, the point of the signal is to rupture our ability to make rational decisions and see the world truly for what it is. There is maybe something to be said about propaganda and controlling the masses or weakening our minds and perceptions to the point of disillusionment where we're left fighting against each other for no other purpose than resentment for our miserable existence, but the film never reaches to that macro extreme. Ultimately, what I think the film is getting at are people coming to the realization that everything their lives stood for is a lie or delusion to trick themselves into believing they're fulfilled when none of them are, until they finally escape their own madness. When Ben and Clark finally arrive at the terminus, they find Lewis has for some contrived reason managed to beat them there and subdued Mia and forced her to consume the signal, prompting a rather unorthodox climax where Ben uses the signal's tricks to his own effect by manipulating Lewis into thinking Ben is actually him. Lewis's own need for control ends up working completely against him as he becomes existentially confused and believes that he must be Ben and thus the real imposter, resulting in Lewis acting out violently against himself by attacking the signal and indirectly electrocuting himself to death. Now, the ending is fairly obscure, but in my eyes, it leaves us with two possible outcomes. The first is Ben and Mia escaping the city and finding peace and solace in the country to live the happily ever after they've always wanted. However, the sudden cutback to Mia twitching mindlessly into the signal insinuates the possibility that this happy ending is just another delusion. It's inferred to by the fact that Ben puts on Mia's headphones, a symbol of her escapism, as she once again becomes immersed in her music. The question remains, is Ben letting Mia live peacefully in her delusion, or given the slight non-chronological framing of events, and notably the tear rolling down her cheek, does it free her from the trance and the power of the signal? Whether the ending is telling you a truth or a lie fundamentally defines what the signal is. It's about us doubting our senses, confusing our perceptions, and in some ways reminding us that just when everything begins to look okay, there will always be that feeling that things will never truly be whole.